This is episode number 102, featuring artist Richard Lindenberg.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Thank you, Jim Kipping. Hey, have you ever painted in the San Francisco Bay Area? Well, if you live out there, you're listening to this, you probably have. But if you haven't, I got to tell you, I used to live out there. I lived there for 10 years, and it was painting paradise. So much more to paint there than any place on earth. What was great about it is you could go to the ocean, you could go to the cliffs, you could go down to Monterey, you could go out to the Redwoods. There's so much stuff. And then, of course, there's the city, the parks, the Golden Gate Bridge. It's amazing. Anyway, this year, the PleinAir Convention is going to be in San Francisco, and we're going to go up to wine country and paint. We have about 80 top master artists teaching you and working with you, helping you become a better painter. The way we do it is we have stage sessions on 4 stages. You watch on these big screens. You interact with the artists all the time. And then in the afternoon, we go out and paint together. And we're going to get you off the beaten path into some really incredible scenery and a great place to paint. So we're going to have a lot of fun. There's nothing like painting with all your friends, hundreds of your friends. It's historic. Anyway, some of the faculty include Joe Zabukvik. Joe is amazing. He's probably the best watercolor artist in the world, or certainly one of them. He's coming in from Australia. We've tried for probably 7 or 8 years to get him to come to the convention, so you don't want to miss this. It's a rarity. And he and Joe McGurl each are doing pre-convention workshops, plus they're also on stage. You also have top painters like Joe Paquette. Yes, Joe Paquette is coming, and Kathleen Dunphy, Laurie Kersey, and Brian Blood, Richard McKinley, and Susie Baker, Albert Handel, Camille Preswatic. I can't even name them all. There's so many. Anyway, about 80 in total by the time we get done. And we also have what we call field painters. These are people who are going to go out there and paint with you and give you advice. You're going to be wearing bright colored hats. And anyway, it's a really cool thing, but you need to get your seats because San Francisco is obviously going to be the most popular location we've ever done. And we managed to get a $200-ish rate at the hotel, which is impossible to get in San Francisco these days. And so you want to do this. Sign up soon at pleinairconvention.com. The interview is also underwritten by Lil et al., art instruction video, tons and tons of great instruction videos. Hard name, Lil et al., but great videos. LilyArtVideo.com. They shortened it. L-I-L-I. LilyArtVideo.com. And coming up after the interview, I'll be answering some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to our interview with a dear friend of mine and a great painter, Richard Lindenberg. Richard Lindenberg, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Well, thank you, Eric. Nice to be here.
So I should probably, in the sense of full disclosure, say that you and I have been working together for the last how many years?
I think it's 9 years now.
Has it been 9 years? Wow.
It's certainly 8. It's either 8 or close to 9 because I think we started in November or something like that.
Oh. So this is kind of a unique situation because Richard is in our advertising sales department and focused mostly on art materials companies that advertise or exhibit in the magazines and so on. But he has become this amazing plein air painter and is in all these major shows. And so I thought you deserved to be interviewed, but I also know that, some people might not understand the fact that we're kind of taking care of one of our own. So just understand that I'm going to ask you the tough questions too.
Okay, no problem.
Not that there are any, but so Richard and I met. We were out. I think we were out. I was out plein air painting. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and you were working for Sennelier.
Savoir-faire.
Savoir-faire, which represents Sennelier. And you were the head of marketing for them or something, right?
Product manager.
Product manager. And I don't know, how did we meet? Do you remember? I don't.
Yeah, we were at the Palace of Fine Arts at a California Art Club paint out day.
Oh, that's right. I remember it very clearly now because you brought this color called Chinese orange and this color called sky
Indigo.
blue. What? Indigo?
What? Well, indigo and Chinese orange is the one that I always bring because I was trying to introduce people to the combinations, that one can make with them.
Well, and it made these really luscious gray greens that were really phenomenal, and I kept it on my palette for many, many years. I still use the Chinese orange. I don't use the indigo, but I found that I can put other colors into the Chinese orange and get a very close, similar effect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
Sure.
So, so you and I, we met at a California Art Club thing at the Palace of Fine Arts, or what was it? It was the place where they had the World's Fair in San Francisco.
Right.
Is that the Palace of Fine Arts?
Yeah.
I thought
that's called the Palace.
I thought that was the museum.
No.
Oh, okay.
No. They have, it's a very iconic rotunda type building there.
Yeah. It was
on the little lake.
It was for the World's Fair or the World's Exposition.
World's Fair.
World's Fair.
I don't remember the year, but.
Well, what I lived in San Francisco for a while, which is why we ended up meeting, and I remember that they had built that building and a series of other buildings for the fair, and that it's architecturally it's one of the most beautiful buildings in San Francisco, and it was built originally to be temporary and torn down in 2 years, and yet they've managed to somehow keep it standing. It's amazing.
Yeah, nice spot.
Yeah, it is a nice spot. So anyway, Richard and I kind of ended up going out plein air painting together all the time when we were in the Bay Area together, and then he brought me to Savoir Faire, and I got to look around at all the cool stuff that he was trying to sell me, and got to meet with Pierre and other people from the company, and then you confided me at one time that your great goal was to one day go out and become a full-time painter, and then soon after that you took the leap.
Yeah, well, when the real estate crisis hit, yes, I took the leap.
Well, I wasn't going to say that.
It was a combination of my choice and their choice.
Yeah. So what I found amazing, and I think one of the parts of your story that is so encouraging, I saw two things happen that made you go from a good, competent painter to being a great painter. And the two things that I saw happen, first one was devoted time. I could see your work over the course of about 2 years when you were out painting full-time every day, which had to be a gutsy thing to do because you're now trying to make a living as a painter. I could see your work go from I don't know, I don't want to insult you, 40% to like 80% over the course by just having all that brush time over 2 years. And then the second thing that I saw is that you went and essentially interned with Scott Christensen for, I don't know, was it a week or a month or something?
Couple of weeks he was working on a project.
Yeah, so you went in and volunteered to help him, and he gave you so many pointers, and then you took a giant leap again after that time with Scott.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, yeah, absolutely.
So what was it that you learned? You were kind of thrown into this whole going out on your own thing, but you certainly could have chased another gig, other income, but you decided to become a full-time artist, and you started entering shows, and you started kind of putting yourself out there in a much bigger way. I know you were out there already a little bit. What was it that you learned about becoming a full-time artist?
It's not something that I would necessarily recommend to everybody. It's a challenge. It's very difficult to make a living as an artist, and it's for me. It was much more, and as it is, I'm sure with most artists, it's much more about how it feeds my soul than it is about selling paintings and making a living. So I have, that's something that's just been inside of me my whole adult life. I've always had a creative side to my viewpoint of the world, and that just fed that.
Now, you had a pretty interesting and, dare I say, volatile past life. I don't know what you're willing to talk about and what you're not, but you went through some experiences that really shaped you. Are you willing to talk about those at all?
Are you talking about in painting world or photography or what?
No, I'm talking about your life and business. You used to own your own business.
Oh, yeah. So my dad took over from my grandpa, and I took over from my dad, and worked in that business with him, and basically for about 20 years, until we had an internal tragedy in the business, which caused the business to fail after 82 years. So my life had to move on and continue to make a living to support my family. So it wasn't involved with art. It was involved, at the time, I went into working in the marketing department of a jewelry company, and then I did other things like that, trying to find a balance that would allow, my creative side and also to make a living, a good living for my family. And, everything, we're all a product of our history. Excuse me. We're all a product of our history. So everything we've done in the past leads us to where we are today.
Absolutely. It molds us. It makes us stronger.
Sure.
If it doesn't kill us.
Yeah. Well, I won't go into that. But, stress can certainly cause illness. I think it's actually one of the big causes of illness in our society these days.
Stress, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But now that I'm painting, no stress.
Yeah, no stress. No stress at all. So your art was originally, other than business, you had the art of your business, but you had an art of photography.
Yeah, well, I was actually in college before I got into business. In college, I was working and apprenticing with a photographer, professional photographer, and was very interested in that medium, but I was very young, very naive. But when I got out of college and stopped interning for him, I realized that if I did want to become more successful in photography, that I had to get a further education. So that led me to enroll at Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara, California, which was the premier training ground for professional photographers.
Yeah, absolutely. The best photography school in the world.
Yeah. And, my goal was not to become a studio photographer. My goal was to become an art photographer and learn as much as I could about what is called sensitometry, or as Ansel Adams would call a zone system.
Which would be values, right?
Yeah. Well, it's all about, as anybody who's ever played with photography, when you expose for the light areas of a photo, the dark areas block up, or conversely, if you expose to the dark areas, the light areas block up. So zone system and sensitometry was all about exposing for the shadows and developing your film for the highlights so that you could capture, unlike today, the digital world, film had its limitations. So you had to expose for the shadows and develop the film for the light areas and squeeze it all onto the film. Then you at least have the image there, much like what's called a raw image today. And then you could print and still have detail in both the shadow and the light. So I learned that, and I learned also the professionalism of how to, really handle dedicating yourself to photography. And they trained us in large format view cameras. We weren't shooting with 35 millimeter. We were shooting with minimum 4x5 cameras.
Yeah.
And all of the controls that had to go along with that, and the different way of exposing film. But essentially, photography school, it did what I wanted it to do. No question about it.
We have that in common. We have that in common. I didn't go to Brookings, but I studied under Fred Picker, who was the protege of Ansel Adams, and had a company called Zone 6, the Zone System, and I used to be a 4x5 view camera. As a matter of fact, there's still one down in the garage that I probably should put on eBay. But
it's not worth anything these days.
I know nobody wants it anymore, but it sure is pretty. It's beautiful cherry wood and so on. So, how did photography influence your painting?
After I got out of books, it was apparent to me that being in galleries is not enough. You have to be able to sell your work, and you have to be able to sell enough of it that you can support yourself and continue your studies and continue your photography. And that just wasn't happening. It was just way too difficult, especially in a place like Santa Barbara, where they were churning out photographers. So I went in. That's when I went back into business with my dad and stayed in that business for another 20 years. But I didn't want to give up photography. I had 8x10 view cameras and 5x7s and 4x5s and Hasselblads and Leicas, and it was my life. I loved it. So I always pursued, even though I was working my day job, I always pursued photography as an accelerated hobby. Had a dark room and just continued that practice until it just became untenable. I mean, it's a lifestyle to do that kind of large format photography. It's absolutely a lifestyle, and it's very difficult to do once in a while. So I moved to smaller cameras, which was much easier, yet I can still produce high-quality pictures with Hasselblad and Rolleiflex. So I did that, and I always kept the darkroom, and I kept working. And that led me to a woman who teaches Polaroid image transfers, which is as close to painting as you can get without it being tactile, using your hands. You're still doing the filmmaking process. And you separate Polaroid film after 10 seconds rather than a minute and brayer it onto wet watercolor paper so the image transfers to the wet watercolor paper, and it becomes a little monoprint in beautiful, with rough edges and just beautiful muted color. And then when that watercolor paper dries, you can also accentuate that watercolor paper with pastels or watercolor pencil or watercolors themselves. But I didn't know how to do any of that. So I took a class, a local adult ed class in pastel. And the first day, I'll never forget it, the first day that I started using my hands to make an image, not on the Polaroid transfers, but on paper. She was training us with little flowers or still life in the class, but I was thrilled to be able to make that. I was not one of these people who drew as a kid. I doodled, yeah. But, I would say I drew stick figures. I never practiced my art like a lot of people say, oh, when I was a kid,
right.
I was just an incredible, I did it all the time. No, not me. So it was very unique, and I was very excited. And after 2.5 years of working in pastel from photographs, didn't have the vaguest idea what plein air painting was. I went to the Carmel Art Festival down in Carmel. At the time, it was in the old Carmel Art Association building, which is like a little Hobbit building. It's a tuck box on Dolores Street in Carmel. And I went to that festival. I drove down there, and I just looked around the room, and there were 60 artists who had 2 paintings each on the walls, hung in frames, with their name above it. And the doors opened, and everybody ran in, and all of a sudden, red dot, red dot, red dot. People are just buying on a buying frenzy. And I just wanted to see the paintings. and I couldn't understand how in a week they could do 2 paintings. I just couldn't. Did you? Oh, that's my phone ringing. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I couldn't understand how they could do 2 paintings in a week. And one of the artists, I have no idea who it was that I was talking to, just started laughing, as you can imagine, and told me, well, we paint 3 and 4 a day. And I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. And then as I'm walking around the room, I naturally gravitated to the pastel area. All the pastel artists were segregated. I walked over there and I ran in smack dab into Kim Lordier's pastel paintings, painting. She did 2 of them. And I was just amazed at what she was able to do. I didn't know Kim. I didn't know that you could do plein air, pastel and plein air. And I just thought it was the most fabulous painting in the world. Needless to say, she didn't win. Reef Erikson won, and his painting, bless his soul, he's gone now. But his painting won, and hers was easily 10 times better than hers. So I knew it was some sort of political, it's the first time she was in that show. So when you get 10 bids at the time at Carmel Art Festival, if you get 10 bids on your painting, it goes out to Dolores Street. They set up a stage the next day, and they have the artist come with their painting, and they auction it in front of the crowd standing on the street. And her $800 painting went for $2,800. And I said, whoa. And she was there with Kevin Corder. They were friends and painting. And so I just struck a conversation with them, and I just was a groupie. I guess that's the best way to put it. Even though she's a young woman, I just couldn't believe what she had done. And that was the epiphany that put me onto plein air painting. And I've been dedicated ever since. Absolutely 100%, no wavering whatsoever.
So when did you make the switch to oil?
After 2.5 years, right then. Pastels, although pastel is a beautiful medium when it's a completed work, I didn't like all the dust. I didn't like the fact that after every painting you had to preserve it under glassine, and you had to then frame it with at the time they were using mats rather than using museum glass where you could just flush mount it into the frame. So it was a very tedious process, and I didn't have the money to go out and, so it would build up in my studio, and all of a sudden I'd have 20 paintings I'd have to bring down to the framer with a, $600 bill to frame them all. So I didn't like that whole thing, and I saw that the oil painters they would just pop it into a frame, go bing, bing, bing with a staple gun, and that was it. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna move towards this. I mean, oil painting is traditionally the accepted medium with collectors, and it's just a rich, luscious medium. So that's what I did.
So how did you learn to paint in oil?
The way everybody does. You practice.
So you just bought some oils.
In fact, when I teach, I just bought oils, and I went out and clumsily tread my way through the first year or two. And whenever I teach, I always bring about 6 paintings from that first year, which at the time, of course, I thought were just the most wonderful things that I had ever done.
Yeah.
And it brings a real laugh to everybody in the class, because after 20 years, you're completely you're a completely different painter. So it's
I don't want to
self-taught.
I don't want to put you on the spot age-wise, but one of the things I hear often is that if you start too late, you can never get good, and you've proven that wrong.
Well, I'm 70 right now, and I didn't start until I was 50.
Yeah.
So with no background or experience whatsoever.
And you've been a good painter for at least 10 years.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, I've been working dedicated. I've been dedicated right from the start, but it takes a long time. I studied with a lot of my contemporary painters who are contemporaries now, But at the time, they were all very practiced, and they were teaching, 3-day workshops or 5-day workshops, just like everybody does now. And so I still take workshops. I still love painting with people that I don't know, and I still love looking at videos and watching. In fact, today I was just watching Matt Smith on a video, and it's always been learning visually, because I'm a visual person. Learning visually is the way I really appreciate it. It's not the lecturing that anybody would do. I don't absorb that, but watching them, I totally absorb it.
Well, you're continually growing, and I think that's really important. So, you've done some pretty interesting things. I remember you telling me about backpacking into the Sierras where Edgar Payne painted. Do you want to tell me about that?
Yeah, last summer I went in with what's called the Granite Group, which was started by Paul Crater and Bill Cohn, and they took every summer, every August, they take a mule trip up to Lake Ediza and all these places high up at 10,000 feet in the Sierras that Edgar Payne and all these other greats used to go to. And they spend a week. They have a cook that comes with them, and they don't have to carry the heavy gear. They just get a mule packed in. But they do have to hike up. So I've had hip troubles over my later years, and I haven't been able to go. But last summer, they went to Chickenfoot Lake, which is also at 10,000 feet, but you can get there from a pack station that's much higher up. So the elevation gain in the hike is not that bad at all, and it worked fine. So I spent a week up there with them last summer. And they do it every year. And we had an exhibition this past year. We had an exhibition for all the Granite Group painters over the last, I think they've been doing this for 10 years, 9 or 10 years.
Well, that's one of my goals. And when the kids get into college, I want to go up and paint where Edgar Payne painted, if I can get up there.
Well, so it's a good hike.
Now, you also did a residency in Banff, and you and I, at the time we're recording this, we're getting ready in a couple of days to meet at Fall Color Week in Banff and Lake Louise and Kanaskus Park in the Canadian Rockies. What was that experience like? Because you were up there quite a while.
Oh, my God. I don't even really know how to describe it. Banff Art Center was built by the Canadian Railroad Barons, and it's modern. I don't know how long ago it was built, but it seems like it wasn't more than 10 years, 15 years max.
One of the most phenomenal art centers I've ever seen in my life.
It's world class.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
So they offer visual residencies, and they offer modern dance residencies, they offer ballet residencies, they offer orchestral residencies, and every summer all of these people come there. They do it all year, but in the summer all of the other they have performances, so people who are visiting Banff can come, buy a ticket and see their performances. And as a resident, I was invited to all of those things, but I also got to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with, 18-year-old ballet dancers and 80-year-old cello players and writers and painters and people who drew on paper and printmakers and woodworkers. They really have an amazing program, and as one of the residents, you can sit in, question, talk to anybody. So it was a fabulous experience, and all I had to do was apply. They checked out my work, and they said, yeah, you're in. And so they gave me a full, I would say, a 20-foot by 20-foot studio to work in. But I'm working out in the field, so basically it was just storage. I did a little gallery show there at the end of it.
Well, I'm gonna go painting. You and I are gonna share a car because I want to. You already know all the hot spots, and so we're.
I know some great spots. Yeah.
And I think we're going to be painting in the snow. So I'm going to move on. You took over when I was still living out in the Bay Area. You started getting heavily involved with the California Art Club, and if I remember correctly, they had kind of a non-existent or pretty quiet anyway chapter in the San Francisco Bay Area. You got involved and you kind of flipped the switch and turned it into a pretty active chapter. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, it was basically non-existent. They did have a chapter, but there was nobody doing anything. And two women, Catherine Young, and Michelle Jader, were actually the chairman at that time, chairwomen at that time.
That's right.
And they had decided that they were going to bring it back to life, and so they started planning. They had an organizational meeting where they invited some local artists to come and see if they couldn't get volunteers to help, put on these things. And
I was at that. I was at that meeting.
You were?
Yep.
Wow. I don't.
Yeah, because
remember that.
I think it was at Michelle's house. It was one of their two.
Kay's house.
Yeah, Kay's house. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, I don't remember that. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I
So,
don't. I'm not very memorable.
It coincided with me. I wanted to get more involved with the painting community. For me, as a painter, I wanted to be able to go places and paint with others and have social outings with painters and get to know the community up here in the Bay Area. So I decided that I would volunteer. And then Michelle, whose career was taking off, decided after a year or so, she decided she no longer wanted to co-chair because she wanted to dedicate her time. So I became co-chair with Kay Young, and we started doing things together that were just incredible. For 4 years, I did a retreat out in Point Reyes National Seashore at the Lindenberg Beach. They have a hostel out there, and we would take it over with 45 painters and go out there. We'd cook together. They don't do anything except give you bunk beds, and everybody snores in the rooms. So we would go out there and just have a blast and paint every day and laugh at night and cook and hang out on the sofas and draw and just talk and get to know people. And I did that for me. It then led to, there were more people that wanted to come in, and we were tired of the snoring and the cooking. So we went to a place called Marconi Center, which is on the east shore of Tomales Bay, nearby Point Reyes, and absolutely gorgeous facility, gorgeous place. And we had 85 painters coming, and this time we had motel rooms. They have rooms, and they had a chef, and they had a kitchen and a restaurant. That all of it would be included at a very reasonable price for the 85 people. And they gave us this whole conference room. So we had Ken Oster do a demo. He came one year and did a demo, and Brian Taylor did a demo, and I'm thinking who else. And so then we would do a portrait session. So one night would be a demonstration night, one night would be a portrait night, and we'd have 50 people around two models doing a portrait session out there.
That's probably where I got the idea for doing portraits at night at the Publishers Invitational.
Yeah. Well, the PleinAir convention at the time, you had launched that, and more people wanted to go to that from this, and it took the thunder away from what we were doing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Took the thunder away because people couldn't afford to go, and spend all that money at yours and then come to ours as well. So it just went from 85 down to 65 down to 55, and then they raised their prices at the center. So we turned off the switch and it stopped.
No, I hate hearing that. I'm so sorry. If I'd have known, I would have canceled.
That's just yeah.
Tell those 1,200 people to go
And then
home.
we did the symposium. Then we did, and you were part of that. We did 2 symposiums for 150 to 200 people at Fort Mason in San Francisco at the Marina, which was wildly successful. Everybody loved it. I know you did a panel talk one year. Bill Cohn did a demonstration. Kevin McPherson came and did a demonstration. Joe Paquette did a demonstration. Lots of local artists, Randy Sexton and Paul Prater and Bill Cohn. So it was a wildly successful thing. We only could do it for 2 years, and then they raised their prices dramatically, and it became untenable. for the same reason that people couldn't spend on yours and spend on ours. So we just terminated ours, which was okay with me because it's a lot of work,
this is the problem that's just happening everywhere as the economy gets stronger. The good news is that everybody's trying to raise their prices. We actually have had places we've wanted to go back to that we either couldn't go back because the price had gotten too high, or because they couldn't accommodate the size anymore. I don't want to say where, but we had one particular place we went to frequently for the convention, and we wanted to go back there, and they doubled the price on us, and we couldn't do that. We would have had to charge $100 million to attend that thing, so we just didn't do it. So that's always
and it's, I know the place, and I won't mention it either, but what a place to paint.
Yeah,
everybody loves it there.
Yeah. So you've you've really gotten heavily involved in the PleinAir community. You do a lot of events. You show at a lot of shows. You've gotten really active. Tell people who maybe are listening to this, 500,000 people almost now that are listening to this, who are kind of curious about this whole thing. What's the best way for them to kind of fit in? What's the best way for them to discover what this whole PleinAir world is like and to kind of get a taste of it? Well,
a number of things. I mean, first of all, most major cities, communities, and beautiful areas have over the years either attempted to have a PleinAir event in the area, or are looking to develop a PleinAir event in the area. And that's a great way to see what it's about. That's what turned me on, going to see the Carmel Art Association PleinAir event. So those were pretty accessible, both on the East Coast, the Central, and the West Coast, and in remote areas in between. I would also say that there's a lot, I mean, you're part of that. There are a lot of instructional videos from contemporary living artists that are just astounding teachers, and with great camera work where you can really visually grasp what they're doing for a very reasonable price. That's another terrific area. But when I first started, Kevin McPherson had a book out. He was one of the best, in my opinion.
Still is.
Called How to Fill Your Paintings with Color and Light, I believe is the title. And it was my Bible. I read it not from front to back a number of times, but I would just open it up, read a chapter while I was doing my business. And, I must have read each chapter 30 times, and it was very valuable to me in my beginning stages of learning. And I think that there's just so many instructors out there as well. Most of the major painters, the community that has developed over the years that you and I have been involved, Eric, is just bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. And the way I equate it is, the PleinAir convention, I know that it's your baby, and I know that I'm part of it as well, but I honestly feel that has contributed to what I call a giant sandbox of PleinAir world that we're all playing in together, from beginner to the most accomplished. We're all part of it, and we're all this loving community. I hardly, in my whole career in the last 10 years with it, I don't think I've met anybody that isn't thrilled to be a part of this PleinAir world that we're in.
So what would you say to the person who's a little bit, either they don't paint or they're trying to learn to paint and they're a little they're not confident about painting, in a public place with a bunch of other people? What would you say to them?
Paint small. Just get a bunch of little panels and go out there and get the right equipment. It's not that expensive. Invest in in a good push shot, a good tripod, good brushes, good oil paints, and good panels. That's all you need.
And that's great advice. But what I mean is, like if you're showing up at like the PleinAir convention, and you're just you're a little afraid to put yourself out there, you were talking about how everybody's really friendly and giving. What do you say to those people?
Well, fear is, I think anything that anybody does that's new and you're around people who have been doing it for a while, there's an element of fear of exposing yourself and looking and appearing to be a complete, rank amateur. I think all of us have experienced that. Everybody who's done this has experienced that. So it's just a matter of fortitude, dedication, tenacity, and hard work. There's no magic to it. I think it's like playing the piano. You can't, without playing your scales every day, you'll never get to Carnegie Hall.
Yeah, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Playing your scales every day,
Practice,
and having
practice,
a lot of
practice.
magic, and having a lot of good friends that help you along the way.
Yeah. Well, what's so amazing is the community is so giving and friendly and open, and I think we all understand very clearly that we've all been there, that we all have cranked out a lot of turkeys. We've all struggled with our paint and our palette and our brushes and everything else, and I think that's why everybody's so giving, because it's not unusual at the convention, for instance, that you'll see somebody who's faculty going around coaching people, but even people who aren't faculty just saying, "Hey, can I lend you a hand, or do you need some help, or whatever?" And I've had people. Somebody came up to me. I don't remember what year it was. It's all blending together now, but somebody came up to me and she said, I couldn't believe it. I was sitting there doing my painting, and Matt Smith walked up to me and he said, "Do you need anything? Do you need any help?" And she's like, Matt Smith was just living and spent with her and breakthrough in a couple of things. And she just said, "I can't imagine this happening." I think that idea of everybody's giving is so wonderful.
I really must compliment you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. We'll edit that out.
Okay, you're breaking up on my end, but I really must compliment you on your insight into what was missing in order to build this community because of your passion. And that's what got me motivated to work with you in the beginning. Was it's just a wonderful community that has developed over the years with this. And I've made so many friends, and I thank you for that. And I've been to so many events, and I thank you for that. And sure, it's me and my hard work, but without that community, without the exposure to the people that I meet at the convention and the people that I've met at events, I would not have this kind of joy. I would never imagine that I would be in this position after all these years. So again, I really do want to pass that piece of my gratitude to you. And I know that you probably get that from a lot of people, but I know you pretty well. And
well, look,
it's important for me to pass that on to you.
Well, thank you for that, Rich. I think that it's really important for people to understand that this hasn't always been there, that this is something that's kind of unique in history, that it didn't exist back in the time of, other painters. There weren't big groups of people that got together. So I think the most important thing the message we can send is, if you want this to hang around so other people can continue to enjoy this for generations to come, we got to keep the quality high. We got to keep the collectors coming to the events. We got to get all the artists to keep working on making themselves better, so that we can kind of keep it going, because otherwise it might be a short-lived thing, for 5 or 10 or 20 years.
Mm. Yeah. Well, we all have to, produce our best work and continue to educate ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So what else is on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to share one story. You're talking about how we need to keep this going. And one of the things that you and I have both discussed over the years is that how do we get more young people involved in this movement, especially on the creating side because they're young, but when they get older, on the collecting side. And I was just at Sonoma Plein Air, where I was one of the participating artists, and we went to gala night, where each of the artists, typically, we all bring what we think is our best painting of the week. They're put on easels, and at the gala, people either buy them or bid on them or not. So there was one woman there, a young woman named Tara Will. And you might have heard that name or not, but she works in pastel, and she works in pretty bright color and very semi-abstract landscape work. And she had the largest painting there. It must have been a 36 by 48 painting or something like that.
Wow.
I just remember it being really big, especially for a plein air piece. But she paints so loosely that she can achieve that where, tight oil painters don't typically go that route. So we were looking at this, and she had a price on it of if I remember correctly, $4,200 for this big framed glass painting, glass to protect the pastel. And I never thought it was going to sell because all the others, maybe $2,500 is like a maximum that somebody would charge for one of their bigger plein air pieces or something like that. And on the bid sheet, you can either bid from her minimum up, or you can do a buy it now if you want to really have that painting. So typically the buy it now price is much higher than the lowest bid painting, the minimum bid. So in her case, she put $9,000 on the buy it now. And I'll be darned, I won't mention the person's name, but he is the founder of one of the largest computer companies in the country. Just walked over and said, yep, took the buy it now price for $9,000 and floored this young Tara Will. And I think she has 4 children. So she was just absolutely in heaven. And that kind of story will get around to the younger crowd. Now, she might be 45. I don't know how old she is. She might be 35. She might be 30. But I still consider that young. I'm 70.
Well, that's...
And those are
Go ahead.
Those are the kind of people we want more of in our world. And there were a number of other... Allison Menke was there. She's, in her young 30s. And there was another...
And Allison is really becoming a good painter.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart, and she's also a sweetheart. Very humble. And another young woman sold really well at the show. So it's really great to see young people emerging at these plein air events surrounded by the best talent in the world.
I'm seeing it more and more, and it just seems to have kind of cropped up the last couple of years where we're seeing a lot more people who are in their even 20s and 30s who are coming to paint. And, even like Kyle Ma, who is amazing, and he's like, what is he, 17 or 18 now? So, there's and everybody gets along, which what I think is pretty cool is that, there are younger people to hang out with, but a lot of the younger people are hanging out with the other people because they're about painting. They want to hang out with people who know how to do great paintings and so that can teach them. So I think that's pretty cool. Well, I think it's great. We didn't talk much about technique or painting or anything like that, but you've given me a lot of really terrific content for this podcast, and I appreciate it, Richard.
Sure,
any final thoughts other than your Sonoma story? Thoughts or encouragement to anybody?
Gosh, just keep learning. Keep painting, keep learning, have fun.
Yeah.
I think I'm convinced that my being involved in painting has to do with when I was in kindergarten. I was only in kindergarten for 1 week in my life, and that because my mom, I was on the cusp in terms of I could go to first grade or kindergarten, and my mother, of course, said, "Oh, let's put him in first grade," but they yanked me out of kindergarten after a week, so I couldn't do finger painting and I couldn't do sandbox with my friends and all of these things that you did when you're a little kid. I'm convinced that has something to do with why I am now a painter.
Okay, well, you just keep believing that. Well, Richard.
All right. Well, anyway, thank you, Eric.
Thank you for being on the PleinAir podcast today, Richard.
Yeah, I'll see you in a couple of days up in Canada.
Well, thanks again to Richard Lindenberg. He is a terrific painter and a terrific guy, and just so looking forward to spending time with him. He'll be out at the convention too, by the way. Anyway, it's now time for the Marketing Minute.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
Well, in the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions. You can email them to me, Eric, at pleinairmagazine.com. Here's a question from Robert K. of Sherwood Park, Alberta. I've heard of direct marketing, but how do I start? Then where's the best place for me to start marketing my art? Well, those are a couple of different questions. I'll try to address them. One of the basic principles that everybody seems to miss: start with strategy before you try to figure out tactics, right? Strategy is what you want to accomplish, how you're different or whatever. Tactics are the ways of accomplishing them. So let me give you an example. Losing weight is a strategy. A treadmill is a tactic. A diet is a tactic. You get the idea? So what you've got to do is you've got to start with a roadmap. Now, you ask about direct marketing. Direct marketing is a very specific kind of marketing. It's a kind of marketing where you're targeting specific people directly and looking for a response. And it's very effective, but you've got to have a list. You got to know who you're targeting. You have to go after some people. So you got to build a list. So direct marketing is direct mail or email marketing. But direct marketing is not advertising. Direct marketing is typically not Facebook or social media. So you really want to understand those things first. There are all kinds of different ways and systems for doing marketing. The best place to start marketing your art is to build a roadmap. Build that strategy. Where do you want to go? How do you want to do it? What do you want to achieve? How much money do you want to make? How many paintings do you need to sell? Who are you targeting? What's the period of time you're going to do this? You've got to go through that process. We go through that process on every little thing we do. It's a complete pain in the butt, but we have to do it, because if we don't, we just start marketing and throwing things out there. It's never going to work. So you can't know what you're going to do until you do those things. So what I would recommend to you is really everybody, you and everybody else who really wants to start marketing your art, start thinking about this very specific things. Got to be specific, got to be measurable, and then come to the PleinAir convention. Hang out, go to the Art Marketing Bootcamp sessions every morning. We do them 3 mornings in a row for about an hour and a half, and if I might say so myself, they're great. And that's, of course, because I'm teaching them. But anyway, I know, my ego's out of control. Anyway, so too many people start with random tactics before they really understand the critical step of what you're working on and get that roadmap done, and then you can start with tactics. Next question is from Thomas in New Mexico. Thomas says, I'm a full-time artist who's doing some marketing. I'm thinking of buying a magazine ad. Should I do local or national advertising? Well, Tom, I'm in the magazine business. I'd love to sell you an ad. Save your money. Don't buy an ad. Now, I'm sure my sales team is turning red right now because they want to sell you an ad, and they are really good at working with people, but they'll tell you the same thing I'm going to tell you. You see, buying an ad is a recipe for disaster. I've done it. I've wasted money. Don't buy an ad. A single ad won't do anything for you. There are exceptions. For instance, like if you're holding a PleinAir event, you can buy an ad for that event, or maybe a show, an ad for that. But typically, even those things you want to do 2 or 3 times if you possibly can, because you got to get people to plan for it, pay attention to it. But if you're selling artwork, if you're selling most things, whether this is art or anything else, you've got to have repetition. And it's not repetition in multiple audiences, it's repetition in the same audiences, right? So like buying one ad in publication A and then buying another ad in publication B isn't the effect you want, because though you might be reaching more people, you're going to have the effect of one ad. Nobody's going to pay attention to one ad typically. But if you buy multiple ads in a single publication or multiple ads in other publications, then you have this idea of repetition, because there's a trust building process, an awareness process. They got to get to know you. It's kind of like dating. I haven't done that in like 100 years, but the idea is that, you ask somebody out on a date, you take them to dinner, you get to know them, you go out on another date, you get to know them more, you do it more and more. The first few dates are a little bit uncomfortable. You're not sure you're really interested, and then you're kind of getting a little bit interested, and then you're getting a lot interested, and then you find out the guy's a creep, and then you don't want to do anything with him anymore. But the idea is you might have the other reaction, and that is you might fall in love. Well, you want people to fall in love with you, and that's why repetition is important. You got to build that trust. So repetition is important. There's lots of other considerations too, but people get sucked into things like audience size, which is a giant mistake. Because, what if you advertised in a giant publication that had 1 million readers? How many of those readers are even going to be people who are going to buy art? Well, maybe some of them, maybe a couple of them. But, it's good for the ego, whether it's local or national, to be in something where you're getting seen. But the reality is you're not going to sell anything. If you want to sell something, go for concentration, concentrated audiences, and you want concentrated audiences who have a specific buying behavior. For instance, I've got a magazine called Fine Art Connoisseur, concentrated audiences of high-end collectors. PleinAir Magazine, concentrated audiences of plein air artists and plein air collectors, people who love plein air. That's where you got to start. Not saying those specific publications, pick what you want, though we'd appreciate it, but you've got to really focus on depth and quality and concentration, not on audience size. So I hope that helps. Oh, by the way, I didn't answer your question about national versus local. Local, if you live in a town, unless it's a really, really, really big city like San Francisco, where we're going for the PleinAir convention, there in a place like that, you got to do advertising because it's really hard to penetrate that town. But if you live in an average town, like I live in Austin, Texas, if you're an artist here, you could own this town. You could absolutely own it because people go to charity events. You don't have to advertise. You just got to get yourself out there, and you just got to work the community. I know a lot of artists. Nancy King Mertz in Chicago has built an empire. And she's built it by getting out and working the town. It's not about advertising for her. So look for ways to do that. We have this thing we call Art Marketing in a Box. It's really designed for people who want to do local promotion. It helps you get noticed locally, and it really works. It's not so great for national, although it's good for helping you get galleries. Anyway, that is the Marketing Minute. Today's podcast was sponsored by the PleinAir Convention in San Francisco. Be there or be square, I like to say. I don't think if you're a plein air painter, you're not square anyway. Anyway, reserve your spot. Joe Paquette, Kathleen Dunphy, Joe Zabukvik, Joe McGurl, PleinAirConvention.com. I feel like singing it. .com. And by Lil at All Art Instruction Video. That's Lily, Lili, artvideo.com. And I've got this blog thing I do on Sunday mornings, and it's a lot of fun for me to do it. You might be bored to death, but if you're interested in finding out more about it, it's called Sunday Coffee, and you can find it at coffeewitheric.com, and then you can sign up. I have a lot of fun with this because I used to be in radio, and so I pretend that I'm still in radio, I guess. Anyway, let's do this again sometime like next week. I'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes, and I'm the publisher and the founder of PleinAir Magazine, and this PleinAir movement is like so giant. Thank you so much for honoring us with your time today. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.